Hey there.
Hey, Diane, how are you?
I am good. I'll apologize in advance. I'm at home, so I've got my kitchen going and we're having some construction done. So hopefully there's not too much background noise for you.
Don't worry about it. Looks beautiful.
Okay, okay, good deal.
So, it's going to be a little bit hard for me. I've got the actual YouTube live going at the same time at about a 20-second delay. So I'm still working out the technology here. So I can literally hear what we're saying, and so it's a little bit of a distraction for me.
No
Hey,
worries.
so why don't we start with a little bit about you, what you do, what your role is, sort of why this is important for you.
Sure. So I am chief appraiser over at Washington County Appraisal District now. I'm brand new there. I literally just walked in the door. I've been chief appraiser at Milam County, just north of Austin, for about 7 years. I've been in the industry for 18 years. Um, and so, yeah, ag and wildlife and those things, it's a topic that we talk about daily. And it's such a benefit for property owners. So it's really important to me that they know that we're here for them and how we can assist them, what their rights are, and anything along the way that we can, kind of educate. It's really important that we get the information to the property owners. It's a drastic difference in property tax when you have an agricultural appraisal. But
Right.
let's just say something happens and you're in danger of losing your ag appraisal. It's also a drastic difference. And so we just
Yeah.
really like to be proactive and try to help people avoid any of those situations where, they see a dramatic increase in taxes or maybe a penalty for changing use, things like that. So it's just a subject that is very near and dear. And like I said, I work through this daily.
Okay. Well, a little bit so for those of you who are joining or haven't joined, you and I, we don't know each other. We've never met, but our families know each other, right? So I
Yeah,
went to high school with your husband.
you did. Um, You went to high school with my husband. I think y'all may have even been employed together at one time years
Yeah, I
ago.
think we were. Yeah.
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 And then your father has served on the appraisal review board over at Milam Appraisal District for quite some time, and he's great. He is great. So I've gotten
So, hey, he's my father, so you can
to
sell that he's great to somebody else.
Okay, okay, I hear you. Well,
I,
I can always count on him to be that perfect mixture of heart and fact.
yep,
And
yep.
he's very fair and yeah, he's great for me. He was great for me.
Well, great. Well, we've got a couple of people watching, but let's just kind of go through, um, you know, like what are some of the biggest, I'm going to call it the top two, top three questions that you get every day, right? Or that
Okay,
people call in and ask you about.
sure. So every day we get asked by property owners that have either just purchased or they're getting ready to purchase land. And they
Yeah.
want to know, can I keep ag value? And so
Right.
that's a big one. We can go into that for sure in a little while. The other thing is what qualifies for ag use.
Right.
Um, and then the other really would relate to like the ag history. So by law, property has to be used for this period of 5 years before it can actually receive the ag value. So if
Okay.
someone buys a property thinking it's an ag, sometimes they find out it's not. And so not only maybe does it not have ag, there's also now this long waiting period. And
Right.
so those are things that we are regularly talking to people about.
Okay, so for those of you who are out there, by all means, if you, we're going to keep going through this because this is great. But if you have questions, I've got the chat box open, and so I can see. Diane can't see it, but there's a little bit of a delay. So if you go ahead and put that question in, I'll get it to her. So Diane, you brought up some great points, and it's almost like unpacking an onion, right? There's
Mhm.
multiple layers. One question that I have for you is the laws or the regulations are or are not uniform across the state of Texas?
So it's a little bit of both. The laws, well, let me say this, the laws are uniform, but the laws do not give you every standard that has to be in place for each county. So as far as the laws, the requirements to get ag use, it's going to be that the property's had a 5-year history of ag. That's a, we, you know, it's a law. We can't do anything
Okay.
about that. The other is that it has to be the principal use of the property. Now, we can talk guidelines all day long about what we consider to be principal use, but from county to county, they're going to have different standards of what they consider principal use. Let's see, time period, it has to be, let's see, there's the 3 big, gosh, those are really the main ones.
Okay.
So go from the 5-year history, that's very black and white. That's easy to understand. But when you start talking about principal use and another term called level of intensity, you have intensity standards. Those things, there's no black and white rules. And so the way I kind of explain that to people is, if you think, okay, if you're talking about a property in Post Oak, Savannah ecoregion,
Yep.
those, what's typical ag use, farm use in those areas can be completely different than what's typical in South Texas or the
Right.
coastal plains, or, you know, any of those areas, even the piney woods. So
Right.
that's why each county has the authority to set their own standards. So
Right.
that's where it may seem like things differ from one county to another.
Okay. Now you talked about it has to be, you know, the level of intensity and the use. So I'm quite certain you who are in an office building, the landowner has to provide you some sort of documentation. Can you talk through what that process looks like how often it has to be done? What's the standard, you know, documentation?
So I'll back up and say, in the tax code, it says that, you know, new owners have to apply. That's a big one to remember. So it doesn't roll over from one owner to another. So if you've bought a
Okay.
property and it's an agricultural producing property, you want to keep that ag value, you absolutely have to make application. Okay. The application is going to ask about the property use, what kind of ag use do you have? And so you'll complete that application. And so if this is say it's a big beef cattle operation, that's very visible. The appraisal district in your county probably has all of that data. They may not need anything from you, but what your number of livestock are, and, you know, just the application that's going to ask those questions. How many head do you have? How many acres are you running them on? So, but let's say perhaps it's not that visible, and maybe you're going to a much different operation, something like bees, an apiary.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're going to do the application. And if your appraisal district asks you for documentation, what I suggest to an owner in that situation is receipts where you've purchased, say, your bee boxes, your beehives, whatever equipment you need to get started. Or what we're finding is really common in our area is that there are big honey producers that will come and use a property. So they'll put their hives on the property, and the owner will benefit by getting to have the agricultural value. So that's a big one. That's a little tip there, you guys. If you're looking for something you can do with your property on a small ranchette, check into local honey. But anyway, so that's agreement.
So that's very similar to like a cattle lease, right? So it doesn't matter if you as the landowner are doing the ag operation or if you're leasing it out to somebody else, whether it's bees, birds, or something else, alpacas, I don't know, right?
Yeah.
Then it still qualifies, and you just have to, so if you own or buy a ranch or ranchette from somebody who has it, you have to apply. You can transition from cattle, horses to something else. You just have to provide documentation. Now, does there have to be a 5-year of using it for bees, birds, or burns before you transition, or you can just transition?
You can just transition. If the property has already qualified for ag, then you can move to a different type of use. But so let's say you're not a new owner and you want to go from one type of use to another. We see that especially as people get older, maybe they don't want to do as intensive of an agricultural operation. You need to report that to your appraisal district. There can be some tax penalties if the appraisers come out and they find a different ag use than what was reported initially.
Yeah, so my dad, he's already, he's sort of looking at down the road. He's got cattle running on it right now. He's got horses, run some hay, and so that's not a thing. But he's planning for down the road if he doesn't want to have someone cows on it. He's already built up these berms, right? He takes fallen trees, pushes them up, and becomes a wildlife refuge. As a matter of fact, he's already got a couple of families of gray foxes. I think they're called Texas gray foxes or
Yeah, I've seen
North
them.
American gray foxes on there.
Yeah.
So
That is a really good option, going from ag to wildlife. I've heard some in the industry kind of discourage people from going to that because you have to do well, I would say you have to. Again, this is one of those things that's a little bit of a gray area, so it differs from county to county. But most counties, the 2 counties where I've been chief appraiser, I require an annual report. Every year, the property owner just completes a report that tells us what wildlife practices they have done. And I like to get just a little documentation. And I really mean a little. Some people will deliver us literally boxes of photos. We just need a little something that shows what they've done on the property. But personally, I think that if wildlife is something that interests you and you want to maintain like that look and feel of your Texas ranchette, wherever it is, wildlife is a great, great way to go.
now, where can somebody, obviously, if somebody in Washington County, they can call you up and they can ask you. But if somebody's out in some different county, where do they go to get information about what wildlife qualifies? What do they have to do? What kind of investment? How long does it take to put something like that in?
So the Texas Parks and Wildlife, their website is really, really a good resource to go to. They have tabs specifically for wildlife use and agricultural value by wildlife use. And so what you really need to do, what we always encourage a property owner to do right off the bat, is reach out to your local Texas Parks and Wildlife biologist. There are regions, so every county is within a specific region, and they'll have a biologist assigned. They'll come to your property, they'll get with you, and then they'll tell you what your property is most suited to. So they'll talk to you about what things you can do. And deer hunting goes right along with a wildlife plan. Deer hunting does not qualify ag. So sometimes that can be a little bit of a problem. Did we?
Okay, so you froze up a little bit. I want you to go back and talk about that deer hunting. What qualifies, what doesn't qualify?
Yeah, so actually deer hunting in and of itself, people will sometimes turn in an ag form and say that they raise whitetail deer for ag. It's not an acceptable use for ag use. So if that's what you report on your ag form, it would most likely, in any scenario that I can imagine, would be denied. But for wildlife appraisal, it is acceptable.
Okay. So you've opened up a can of worms. So there's a difference between ag use and wildlife use, and some potential new buyer or somebody who's not experienced can say, oh, I'm doing this ag, I'm raising whitetail deer. And be like, no, but you can do that under wildlife. So how is somebody out there supposed to know the difference of what to do, what not to do in those situations?
So that's going to be a situation where you really need to communicate with your appraisal district in your county. Because I have talked with some chief appraisers that will tell you that those deer are breeding stock. But, everything I've seen from the agricultural code and the tax code, information from the Comptroller's office, is that for agricultural use, it has to be defined as livestock. And I have yet to see where they've defined any indigenous deer as livestock. So it's kind of a gray area. I would certainly encourage someone to go speak to their local chief appraiser, their local appraisal district. So it just really, it gets to be a very fine line. And yeah, it's always my goal to get someone to the wildlife appraisal, right? Or to ag appraisal. It's not my goal to ever keep them from getting it. So it's really important that we are able to have an open dialogue about, okay, you're raising zebra. What are you going to do with those? Are they there for hunting? Well, we really need, it's just it can be a big subject.
So we've got Kim. Kim has asked us a question. What is the tax cost difference between an ag exemption versus a wildlife? Is there a difference, or are they pretty much the same?
So far, I have not seen anywhere that there's any difference. So when wildlife came along as an allowed valuation under the tax code, the laws were written so that it wouldn't be different. So that local school districts, cities, whatnot, they wouldn't, well, not cities, but school districts and counties wouldn't lose any additional funding because of wildlife. So every experience that I've had, your ag value and your wildlife they're exactly the same. So it's really about not so much any additional savings, but what does the property owner, what fits their situation better? What would they prefer to do?
Okay. So I know that you personally are very forgiving, very understanding. Like you said, work with somebody to get to the thing. But let's just talk about the hard facts of the law. Hard facts of the law are, if you lose this exemption, if you lose this appraisal, everybody calls it an exemption, but technically it's really an appraisal.
Correct.
If you lose it, there's a big penalty associated with that. Can you talk me through what that looks like?
Yeah, so in general, the tax you would pay on a property with ag value is going to be 90% less than the tax you would pay at market value. That 90% has held for at least 15 years that I've been looking at that. So if you stop using the property, or your use goes down to like that below the level intensity that I mentioned earlier, and you lose ag, you're going to get that 90% increase in the following year's tax bill. But on top of that, there is what the legal term is change of use, and the most common term is a rollback. So it's 3 years of what the tax would have been without the ag valuation, plus interest. So there's compounding interest on top of that. So it can be very large.
Yeah, it can be significant. So I had some clients who bought a nice little ranchette, this is 10 acres or so. And they didn't go with, despite my advice, they didn't go with an ag lender, somebody that knew and understood. They went with one of the big banks, and I'm not going to mention them by name because I don't want the YouTube police after me, right? But basically, it was a shocker when it came down to closing, and the last underwriter was like, well, I don't know if they're going to maintain this ag exemption or not. So I need to put in escrow all the money associated with the back taxes so that something doesn't happen. And my clients ended up having to pay a whole bunch of cash in at closing, and just in case they didn't apply or they didn't do this, right? How often do you see that happening?
So we see that a lot. Again, I don't want to throw any bank or escrow agent or any closing agent under the bus, but here's the facts of what I see. There was some banking code change several years ago that says you can no longer make someone take ag value off before you can get a loan. Okay, so that came along. Before that law, banks were making people not have ag on the property so that the bank would have a position of paying a rollback. So when that law got changed, a lot of the closing agents or whoever, title companies, mortgage companies, they started requiring a rollback to be paid up front. Some do the escrow and would just get a calculation from us and hold that in an escrow to be refunded if we didn't actually do a rollback. But what I find actually more common now, they want us to just do a rollback. So we get a call from the title company, hey, I need a rollback on this tract. I just have such mixed feelings about that. Now, if we're going into a subdivision and we know without a doubt that this is going to be a rollback, it's going from ag to just
Yeah, somebody bought a big place and they're
right.
gonna develop it into a
We're
subdivision.
subdividing. Yeah. So it's being
Yeah,
subdivided. It's going to be a subdivision, sidewalks, and streets are going to replace where hay was being cut. Okay. I don't have a problem with that. But when you've got this 10-acre piece of property and there is still, say, a lease, maybe a neighbor has some cattle on the property or a small hay patch or whatever it is that they're doing, and that's continuing, I really do have a problem with being told, we need you to roll this back. And so it's
right,
always a conversation that I go into with the property owner. And then that gets a little bit hairy because it's the current property owner, it's the seller, but it's also
right,
the
it's the
buyer.
seller.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's like, you guys, I don't want to hold up your closing. I don't want to make this difficult for you, but you realize you may be paying something that I would never actually charge you. If you're going to continue ag, we're not going to roll it back. So
Right.
it can be difficult, but again, sometimes, it just depends on that closing agent. Like I said, we don't want to hold up any, purchase of property. So, or any closing. So it's, yeah.
I'm going to throw out here some questions that I get all the time. Okay. So, I think it goes back to a term that you've used several times here, and I'm just going to relate to it: the intensity. The intensity. How many acres do you have to qualify for ag exemption? Is it 1 acre, 5 acres, 10 acres, 500 acres? And then what are the animal types? Can you get ag exemption for raising chickens or alpacas? Or I remember back when I was younger, I don't know what it was, the ostrich eggs. So you had all these, goat farmers and sheep farmers all of a sudden had ostriches because they were raising the eggs. What are some of the crazy animal types or ag type exemptions that you see?
Yeah. So my most exotic, which was actually in my own county, I don't mind telling y'all that, but it was on a turtle farm. The turtles they were harvesting turtle eggs to be sold in a certain market. And so, and he qualified for ag. So it, to me, represented like a minnow farm for bait. I mean, he had the
Yeah.
little, strips of land with water and the turtles and whatnot, and they harvested those turtle eggs. And so fisheries, apiaries, the turtle farm, all those things can qualify. So there's, the way we look at it, or actually the way the code defines it, is you have to be producing a crop for either human or animal consumption, fiber, so cotton, or even like the alpaca fur,
Yeah.
or livestock. And the livestock have to be agricultural in nature. So there is a pretty significant list of those available. And I want to just mention this, and we could talk about it again. The state comptroller has a manual for the appraisal of agricultural land, and it's really great. I would tell anyone that has questions to go there.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's
So
on.
is there like a link, or maybe I can post it into the things, or is there a website where people can go to the comptroller's office for that?
Yeah, so it's window.state.us.gov, and that's going to be the Texas Comptroller's office. Once
Okay.
you're in there, you're really looking for Property Tax Assistance Division. Now, I can send you a link.
Please do. And if you can send it to me, or if you can put it in our chat, I'll put it over into the other one. So Kim asked a question. I think I know this one. She's asking, can you be an out-of-state owner of a property and still qualify for ag or wildlife if use meets qualifications? We intend on moving to Texas in the future, but can't just yet. We're looking and researching now. I understand that to be true. Yes, it doesn't matter where you live. If you're the owner of the property, you can still qualify for that, right?
Correct. So we don't want to pick on anyone that's an out-of-state owner, but when we see the out-of-state owner application come in, that's where we might say, okay, you're out of state. Can we get a copy of your lease? Who's taking care of the property, or how are you using it from where you are? So that would just maybe be a good example of one where we would need a little more documentation.
Sure. Was that Ira that came in behind you?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. dressed yet.
Tell him I said hi.
Kerry says hello. Yeah, I'll let him know.
No worries. Okay. So intensity. So if somebody had questions about the intensity of the use, they would go to that comptroller's manual. And is that something you probably have on your desk that you use pretty regularly?
So actually intensity, I'm glad you asked this question. We really need to probably spend a little time on that. Intensity is going to be county specific. So kind of like we talked about a minute ago, if you're in the coastal plains, you're not going to run as many head of cattle as you would like in a post oak savanna or even another, more lush eco.
Blackland prairie. Yeah.
Exactly. So intensity levels are set locally. And my experience, I am not a farmer. I'm not a farmer. Yeah. So I use my local ag advisory committee, which is local producers, and they serve in a voluntary capacity to advise me on local ag uses. So
now the intensity. So let's just talk about this. I've talked about it in my videos several times about, hey, you get the local ag extension agent out. He'll help you based on the condition of your fences, the condition of your land. He'll help you calculate a carrying capacity, right? And so that would be sort of what's the balanced way of however many head of cow calf bull operations. So say he helps you calculate what your carrying capacity of that land is. What sort of intensity? I know it's driven by county to county, but generally you're looking at 100%, 80%. Like if the ag extension guy tells me I can run 60 head of cattle, but I decide to only run 10 head of cattle, is that going to qualify?
It may not. It may not.
Right.
So typically his carrying capacities are going to be based to some degree on the same data that we would look at, which can be your local soil survey and what's typical from USDA, things like that. So, it's really good to get those intensity standards from your local office. I can tell you in like Central Texas, Milam County, I have seen an intensity, you were talking about several different things. Sometimes it's the size of the tract. So I know like Williamson County, the last time I checked, they had a 40-acre minimum. Bell County Bell County, I believe, was 18 to 20 acres. Milam County is 6. So it just it is going to vary from place to place to place. But once you know what that number is and you've established that number, then we can start talking about number of head. So like for Milam County, we would say if you had improved pasture, we would like to see one animal unit. So either, 1,000 pounds of whatever your livestock is, an animal unit, one for every 3 to 5 acres of improved pasture. And on native, we would go from anywhere 5 up to about 9 or even 10, depending on how scrubby and just, really and truly what the property can carry. So what the carrying capacity is, we look to see that number of livestock on the property. Okay.
So let's circle back to fibers, right? Obviously, a lot of people have dealt with cotton. A lot of people have dealt with that. I was having a conversation with a gentleman out of Dallas who's really looking to do value add. Transition into high level farming. What are you seeing as far as conversion of native land or improved pastures to cash products like hemp? I know that recently the state of Texas has authorized not marijuana production, which has the THC, but has authorized hemp, which is used for the fiber and the CBD oils and the everything else. What are you seeing across the line of transitioning into that as an industry?
So the main thing I've seen is there are people out there, producers ready to go that want to go into that. But there is, I guess you could there's some red tape in that there's not a lot in place yet to say exactly how that should be accomplished, exactly what the role, how much oversight there would be from local, whether it's USDA or maybe somebody through like Texas A&M. The agri-life is huge in the ag industry. So there's no guidance yet for how to do this. So,
So
for
it's like,
example,
hey, go ahead.
okay. Now, as I say, Milam County, we had a couple of guys that were interested in doing this on a very large scale. And
Yeah,
so it had gone through and the laws had been changed so it would be an allowed use. But then they had to wait to make sure that testing could be done to make sure that the THC, like you say, is less than, so many parts per million or whatever, however they're going to do that. In my experience, I haven't seen anyone do it yet. I know there's a
yeah.
lot of interest, but I haven't got anyone that's actually been able to get anything off the ground because they're waiting for other, I guess, oversight agencies to kind of say, here's the green light, you can go ahead and get started with this.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you a question. So I have read all the Texas A&M studies, and what was it, from 2000 to 2010, the price of raw land basically doubled. And
Mhm.
then from 2010 to about 2020, it's kind of doubled again. And a lot of that's driven by people from markets like Houston, Dallas, California, Austin, driving out and going into these areas. What are some of the things that, does your experience back that up? What are some things that you're seeing, and how is that impacting the local markets? Are you seeing people way overpay market value just because it seems cheap?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. For sure. And kind of what we'll see is, I would say maybe around 2017, I would get a sale price on vacant land, especially in the southern part of our county that was closer to Austin. We started seeing sales that we just, make your jaw drop. And we didn't use those sales to value everyone because they just weren't typical. One sale doesn't make a market, right? That's what we would say.
Well, you're kind, because I've heard from my father stories about, oh, well, sorry, Farmer Joe, Johnny from Dallas came in, or, Jane from California came in, and that's the new market price. So you have a much kinder, gentler heart than I do. So,
Well, so here's the thing though. I said 2017. So
yeah,
now there's so much more of those high prices, and it's almost as if there's not a ceiling.
yeah,
It's selling so much that anyone could put raw land or agricultural land on the market, and they're also going to be able to get those high prices. It's not just these most idyllic settings anymore. It's affecting everything. And
yeah,
so where it used to be, okay, that's just an atypical sale, we're not going to use that to base our appraisals on. We now have so much of that data that we cannot not use them. And
okay,
so then it becomes, okay, well, are people overpaying? Possibly, but is that the market? It is. I mean, it's
okay.
a tough situation. I always like to stay in the middle. We refer to them
Yeah,
as outliers. You'll have these
right.
ones where people come and tell you, well, I only paid, 60% of what my appraised value is. And I'm like, well, yes, but all of these properties that, go right up to you, that this is actually what's typical. So did you
Yeah,
know this person? Was this a private sale? And we usually start finding out that it was something like that.
yeah,
So atypical can be on the low side, but it can also be on the high side. So we do try
yeah.
to go with a range that's most typical when we're using that to value hundreds or even thousands of parcels. But
Yeah.
yes, the land market, it's just unbelievable. If I had had any idea, we would not be sitting in a bungalow in the heart of our little town. We would have been on a
Yeah.
few acres. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just insane how much land value has increased here.
So just a quick little administrative note. I got a text from my wife saying that there's some sort of problem with the chat. I don't understand why, because there are some people getting through. So if you're having trouble with the chat out there, my sincerest apologies. Keep trying, maybe hit refresh on it, because some people are getting through. Some of the chats are coming, and I'm not seeing any indications on my end. Sorry. But there are people out there, and there are people putting questions in. So thank you. I appreciate this. Okay, so where were we? Oh, one of the things, talking about valuation and talking about people coming in, I get this all the time. People look for land. As a matter of fact, it was a question on one of my videos. Hey, I found X number of acres for land and it's really cheap and blah, 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 blah. And then it's like, well, have you taken a look at it? Is there, oil wells on it? Are gas wells that you're going to be, having to deal with, and the mineral rights don't convey? Is it, got mesquite all over? Generally, when you see markets, and because that's your job, right? You pay attention to what's going on in the market all the time, just like I do. Do you
Correct.
see any cheap land out there?
Yeah, we do. That little diamond in the rough, estate sale, cheap land, that's usually, pretty sweet. But yeah, you'll see cheap land and you can find out that perhaps you can't even build on it because it's reclaimed land.
Yeah.
You really, and I'm not even sure what the best resource is to find out some of that stuff.
Well, the best resource is to have a heck of a good agent that will go in and help you do that research and discover why it's so cheap, because it's a long process. You got to go through and check easements. You got to go in and check, title history. You got to go in and do an assessment of, where's their commercial development? What's the proximity? All those things, like, can you hunt on it? Can you not hunt? And so there's a lot of homework that you got to go in and investigate as to why it's valued the way that it is. Because my experience has been, it's cheap for a reason, and generally there's some sort of fundamental flaw wrong with it, but it sort of sets unrealistic expectations of how much it costs to buy this land.
Right. And flooding is a huge issue too. I mean, some of
Yep.
those waterways are beautiful. I mean, it depends on the season when you're there. It's a
Right.
feature at times. But if you're really looking for a homestead property, it's a big deal. Flooding can be a big problem. Even just and especially for people new to Texas, the distance from a paved road to your home, I would say that's really something to think about. Some people don't mind, but
I
you could
have talked about that. Oh, yeah. And every time those caliche roads that you regrade them, you're going to pick up a nail. You're going to bust, you're
every
going to,
time.
every time.
Every time.
So Washington County, actually the border of Washington County is the Brazos River, right? You guys have to, but Washington's on the high side. What's the county next to it, just to the east that catches most of the flooding of the Brazos?
There's Grimes, but east is going to probably be, is it Austin County? I'm still so
Yeah,
new. I think it's
think
Austin.
So.
It may be
Austin County.
Mm-hmm.
And also a little note, Kim tells us that she had trouble with the chat initially. She left and came back and then it worked. So anybody else that's having trouble with that chat, my sincerest apologies. I'll talk to the YouTube president here shortly, okay? Okay, so flooding, it's an issue, right? That you have. I know that you can do generally the flood mapping. I'm pretty familiar with that, but what sort of flood mapping, what sort of resources do you use when assessing the county?
So Milam County, I'll just speak to that for a moment. My understanding is they're just now going through having FEMA provide flood maps. So Milam doesn't actually have flood maps available. Not every county does. If you haven't regularly experienced flooding, there may be no flood map. So if you're a county in that situation, I would really suggest you get to your local USDA office. There should be one somewhere in your county. It's a little different than your ag extension agency. So if you end up at the ag extension office accidentally, they'll point you your USDA office. It may even be referred to as your I always mess up the letters. Natural Resource Conservation Service, so NRCS.
Okay.
What they do is they can put you, they can print for you actually, or give you a digital version of a map of your property where USDA has determined your soil type, but they've also done floodplains in virtually every county.
Okay, well, this is a good tip for me. So can I, do I only get that if I am the owner of that property, or can I get that as someone who's investigating and looking for land for, for my clients?
You can actually pull that up online and see any county, and it's it can be a little difficult to navigate. I'll be honest. I had trouble using the site, but I walked into the office and asked a young lady, and she taught me how to use it, and I'm able to use it a lot. And you can actually save different maps of any property in Texas, so, and probably other states. But I mean, I have no reason to look at anything else. So, but yeah, I've used it on lots of different properties.
Because I have been using the geographic information system from the Texas Parks and Wildlife, and I actually did a whole video on utilizing that. But that's good to know that the USDA is another resource that I can reach out to. Thank you. So we covered ag exemption. We covered, okay. So I've got J.A. Sons. Everybody, what's out of California? Just wait when. Thanks. Oh, there was a political comment that we probably, you and I have to remain very politically neutral.
Ambiguous? I don't know.
Ambiguous, right?
Yeah.
But yes, there was of course was a political comment out there, political question. So but basically let's talk about that as far as we talked about, people coming in from out of town. You're seeing that in Washington County. Describe to me a little bit about, you've got Brenham there, you've got Chapel Hill. So talk to me about this ranchette, people moving in from out of town and wanting to have that 10 to 20 acres and the 2 or 3 longhorns out front. What are you seeing out there?
So let me choose my words carefully here. Washington County has some really rigorous standards for ag use. I'm not saying they're wrong at all.
Yeah.
But they really look at intensity standards a lot, maybe more stringent than others that I've been acquainted with. So I think it's really important that you, any property owners looking into ag in Washington County, visit with us. But that's also something I'm going to be looking into as a new chief appraiser. Definitely talking to my ag advisory committee. You guys, hey, are these standards the ones, the best for us? What's most typical here? You can't require everyone or the law doesn't require, let's just say that the law doesn't require that to have an ag valuation, you're a huge operator and that your main source of income is your farm. That's not a requirement by law. Now there is a type of ag that's like that, but in general, the ag we're talking about is not that. So we'll see. Their carrying capacity, or excuse me, their level of intensity for livestock is almost 1 animal unit per acre. So
wow,
definitely something I need to see, what's the data that backs that up? Is that really even feasible? So it's just something I'm going to have to look into and really do some research on.
So you brought up a really good question. You don't have carte blanche. You can't just go out there and say, these are the rules. How do these rules get made in each county, and how do they get interpreted in each county?
So my philosophy, I'll just share that. My philosophy, and I believe what I would say 95% of the counties do, is you find a really good group of local producers to advise you. And so for anyone in this that's interested in this at all, or producers that are concerned, I would encourage them to reach out to the appraisal district and offer their services on that committee. They typically only meet once a year. We don't have, it's not a huge commitment, but we get that committee in there and we start asking about what are typical cash leases like here. What can you run? What's your different carrying capacity for native pasture versus improved? Or what have drought conditions done to your cotton crops this year? All sorts of things we talk to them about. And then that information is used. We actually went through and did a survey in Milam. I say we. In Milam, we went through and did a survey of all of the counties that surrounded us to find out what their intensity standards were. We took that back to the Ag Advisory Committee. We worked on what's typical for Milam County, and we really got down to the nuts and bolts of these are going to be the intensity standards for Milam County.
Yeah.
So for instance, in Washington, to set those intensity standards, I would assume that's been done by the local ag advisory committee in conjunction with the chief appraiser and any other data we have available from the ag extension agencies, agency and the USDA office.
Right.
I don't know if that's
So-
exactly what you were asking me, but
No,
that's
it
kind of how we-
absolutely does. Absolutely. One of the things that's unique about Milam County, and you know it, is it's right there at that border between the Post Oak Savannah and the Blackland Prairie. I mean, if you're over in Gauls, you've got that red, that red dirt. If you're, in Rockdale, you've got that sandy, soils. And then you start moving out towards Taylor and you just got like Blackland Prairie, right? You got that
Absolutely.
deep. And is that unique? I assume that it's got to be hard to put a uniform standard carrying capacity and uniform intensity standards across a whole county, much less surrounding counties, right?
Right. And one thing that I think helps us in Milam is Buckholz. Okay, so it's tiny. Buckholz has about 800 parcels. It's just a small little school district. I say 800, maybe it's probably more like 1,800 if you take the surrounding area. But the reason I bring them up is they have a lot of rocky soil. So for them, carrying capacities are a little different. We have this standard in place, but or if they're trying to grow crops or if they're doing an improved pasture, it's going to look a little different. But the thing that's helpful is producers that know what they're doing, producers that are actually farmers. They're not going to have an ag use that's not good for the type of land they have. So like in Gauze, Milano, where it's all that clay, that's most of our wildlife property owners. That's recreational property. And it's getting the valuation through wildlife versus the southern part, like you said, going towards Taylor, going towards Travis and Williamson County, that's going to be cropland. It's all black dirt. And so that's the majority of our cropland. So you'll find that the use is usually one that's in harmony with the type of land for that area. So we don't have too much trouble with the city standards. Most producers are doing things that go along with the land that they have.
Okay. So let's circle back to what I advise my clients, if they're not farmers, they're not ranchers, but they want to maintain that ag exemption or that wildlife exemption. They don't want to pay too much taxes. I always call it the 3 B's: bees, birds, and berms. Mm-hmm. What are some other unique, transition, like you call wildlife or recreational, or what are some insights that don't fall into the 3 B's that you've seen that could help people out in maintaining a ag or wildlife exemption or appraisal? Let me use
we talked also about chickens. So I want to mention this really quickly. To get ag, it has to be that there is a commercial intent, that you're trying to produce a product to be sold. So if they're your own chickens, or if it's your victory garden, even if it's large, and it's for your family, that's not going to qualify for ag use under current law.
Okay.
So the only chickens we have that qualify is going to be your big chicken farms, like your Sanderson farms. They've kind of left this area, but those big producers, turkey houses, poultry houses, and gardening is really to qualify under current law, right? There is a farm that I'm familiar with that grows organic produce to be sold in some of the more
Farmers
organic
market.
Grocery stores in Austin. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, they're actually in, I think, perhaps all of that qualifies because it's commercial, right? They're actually growing a product to be sold. But things for property owners that I find interesting, there's a property owner, some of these property owners get kind of near and dear to our hearts. So there's a couple of ladies in their county, and they're not spring chickens, we'll just say that.
Yeah.
But they encourage purple martins to come to their property. And so it qualifies for wildlife because they are trying to encourage an indigenous species to the property. And so we get their wildlife reports and it's great. I mean, you just get to see, but they love doing it. That's the other thing I would encourage people is it's what they enjoy. I mean, if you don't want to bird watch, I wouldn't put birds on your wildlife plan. We didn't really talk about that, but for wildlife, you have to have a plan by the wildlife biology, Texas Parks and Wildlife will help you do that. But do something you like. If you're a hunter, there's no problem with wildlife doing a census count, trying to encourage white-tailed deer to your property, putting in feed plots with those black-eyed Susans and all those different things to encourage the gamma oats and all the things. This is all stuff I know nothing about in my real life. Through wildlife, this is stuff that will qualify. So I would say that for wildlife, just make sure if you're considering that it's something you would enjoy doing anyway.
All right,
and
so
then I was gonna say for ag, one thing I see when people start to get up in years, or perhaps maybe someone loses a spouse, that's a very difficult situation. You may have a producer that passes and his wife is trying to determine how to not have this huge increase in taxes. Lease your land. Lease your land. There are lots of places out there where you can advertise that you have land available for lease, and someone will run cattle or someone will plant hay and cut it. So that would be my advice.
That's a great point. I know you probably don't know the answer to this question, and I wouldn't hold you to it if you do, but from what I understand, leases basically just kind of cover your costs. You're not making any real money off of it. However, you get the benefit associated with the different appraisal. You get to maintain that use, and then plus whoever's leasing your land is gonna put some investment into pasture improvements and things like that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's good for all of those reasons. So you're not looking to necessarily, or I would just say as a taxpayer, let's say it was me as a taxpayer, not any kind of professional advice here. But if I were going to look for someone to lease my property for improved pasture, what you're going to get out of it is lush green pasture most of the year. And you're going to get the benefit of the agricultural value on the taxes. So yeah, it's not so much about making any money off of the lease. It's more about being able to sustain an agricultural value, have the level of use that the law requires.
Okay. Well, Diane, we've been going about 57 minutes or so. It feels like it's just been about, 5.
It has
I haven't gotten any more questions come through, so I don't know if there's any burning questions out there, but let me just say, one, how much I appreciate you coming on board. How much I appreciate the doing this with me. And do you have anything that when you think back and say, man, this is something that if somebody who was going to move to Washington County from Houston, Dallas, Austin, California, South Carolina, wherever, Chicago, Illinois, what sort of advice or what sort of tips or what would you like to reach out and tell them in closing?
In closing, 2 things, and I'll keep it quick. If you're going to buy a property and you want it to be ag, look for the history. If it does have history, count on that 5-year waiting period. And if you are interested, this is if your immigrant workers be already in ag or in ag first. So legislation, it's a little bit complicated, but look to see that there's ag value already. If you're a new owner, if you're going to buy a property and you want to go into wildlife, make sure there's already ag in place.
Okay, so we did get a last minute, so that did spark a question. We have, do you have to pay taxes for each cow that you own?
No.
I mean, yeah, no, that's.
You have to purchase a tag, is my understanding, and I don't really know anything much about that. It's kind of a new thing. I say new, it's probably 10 years old, but yes, so you do have to tag your livestock. So that's a cost that hasn't always been here, but no, you do not pay tax on the livestock themselves.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I just want to say thank you. Please tell your family hi. Next time I'm going through Washington County, I'll be sure and just wave your way.
Do that.
By any means, if there's anything that I personally can do for you or my family can do to help you guys out, please don't hesitate to reach out and ask. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much for having me, Kerry. I've appreciated it too.
No, thank you, Diane. I think this was great. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.